What's up, guys? This is Mary here with episode 10 of Listeners. So, last episode we had this big confrontation between Mew and Echo. Echo really lost. It seems that Mew is potentially, maybe, under the control of Tommy for now. And so, Echo was trashed, right? Literally trashed. Thrown out with the garbage and is now whisked off somewhere where I presume he will try to get back on his feet. In the preview last episode, it seemed that he's going to meet some new characters and whatnot, and maybe, revitalize himself and then go back in time to stop Mew before the final big ending. We are on episode 10 after all, 3 episodes until the end. On the other hand, in terms of Mew and Tommy, the guy in the tower, the one who's calling the shots on all the things, I'm not entirely convinced that Tommy has Mew fully under his control. I think it's more of a case where they're trying to use each other. I think Mew right now is definitely thinking that she is of the Earless and she wants to do something in regards to the Earless, probably even under the control of the Earless Queen, right? But that's going to have to be probably somewhat later. We are probably going to focus on Echo's journey, at least for right now. So let's jump right into the episode. Alright, let's begin in 3, 2, 1, play. Funimation. Robert Johnson? I don't know who he is. Wait, is that Jimi? I mean, I presume that's Jimi, right? White hair, probably Jimi. If nothing else, this anime definitely makes me appreciate the talents of Jin. The one who basically wrote all the music. Yeah, we just see here. The one who wrote all the music in this anime. Definitely going to be following him for sure. It's quite funny how it works. There's quite a few series now where I basically like the music that comes out of it, but don't really like the anime itself. Like the Fairy Gone series. It was them that introduced me to the music group No Name. The anime left a lot to be desired. At least this one is kind of interesting in its way, I guess. Crossroad Blues. Is that by Robert Johnson? Who we just saw at the beginning there? Well, I mean, if we're talking about big names in blues in the US, I guess, B.B. King, Eric Clapton, Bob Dylan, maybe? Though I think he's more folk. Ooh. Who are you? Blues Town? What the hell is a blues town? You definitely need to drink some beer when you're watching a series like this. Janice. Okuwa Echo. 'I'm trying to hear the background music. I think it's sort of blues inspired, but I'm not 100% sure. Why do I feel like I know her voice? It seems very familiar to me. Janice's voice, I mean. Trying to figure out where voice actress is. Well, ain't that nice. Okay, now this is blues. This background music. This is definitely blues. Ooh, that's gotta hurt. I wonder how long he stayed here. This definitely doesn't seem like a short amount of time. At least a few weeks? He's gonna discover something related with Jimmy. It just so happens King of Delta Blue. Oh, records. Memories? That collection would be worth a lot in the real world. Is this old man finally going to speak? Oh, no. Wow. I wouldn't even say just a few weeks. He stayed here for a few months. Giving birth? Oh, he talked. Chicago, St. Louis, Liverpool. Oh, trying to pull him out. Why isn't the record playing any sound? I guess it might have to do with the premise of this episode. I think in the synopsis it said that there's no music in this world. It's like, you still. Oh. What? The father of all players. Source of all. What? Yeah, that's true. What? What is this series going on about? I mean, I think the real funny thing to me is that I'm almost reminded of Evangelion, right? And this philosophical things and all this talk about you versus them, you versus others, and whatnot. It's a record! And a record I can't play. Oh, by the way, this is actually a famous album jacket. Also of classic rock. This is also a classic rock album cover. What? Guess this is probably one. People of Blues. It's also a more of a peaceful. So Jimi was of the blues. I thought he was an earless. Did he turn into the earless later on? Listeners. So the earless are actually listeners? But wait, if her sister is actually... So Mew is the result of Jimi and the Queen merging? Yeah, I was just gonna say, if Janice is actually the sister to Jimi. Oh. Now you're a player. WTF. So are you a memory as... Do they even know the concept of song? Oh yeah, they can actually hum, right? I this is this is trippy. So what actually happened all these few months that he was here? Was it all like a dream or something? Yeah, this house is actually completely run down. So it's like it was basically so did he or did he not become a player? Wow, this is early. It looks like we're gonna have some stuff after the ending. Alright, but let's take a look at this. Oh, nice. Oh! This is the, this is the same melody as the one which they were humming, which Mew was humming. So it's this song. Is this supposed to be the country roads of this universe? Slumber. Huh. Interesting. Really. Alright. There's actually quite a bit left. So this is actually the earless queen, right? Yeah. Yeah. She was just using him. She's the earless queen. Or the listener's queen, I guess. Or king. Yep. Then all the earless are coming. Yep. Oh. Damn. Yeah, you're probably gonna die here. Oop. Turn into an earless? Oh no. Completely gone. This girl gonna stay alive? After 7 days? Damn. Alright, there we go. See you guys just a minute. Alrighty, so as expected, Echo went to do some soul searching on his own, and at the end of this episode, we see that Mew, or rather, I guess we can call her the listener queen or listener king, if you will, was only cooperating with Tommy on the surface level. She has some other plans in mind, right? So let's talk about all this. First of all, I think the most important thing is that we learned finally the bit more about the truth about the Earless. So first of all, they are actually not called the Earless. Their true name is called the Listeners, which I guess kind of makes sense in a way, considering that their ears are so big, right? That's something that I had been thinking of since the very first episode when they were introduced as the Earless. I mean, they're literally the opposite of being earless. They have like these huge ears, right? So it makes a lot more sense that they are actually called listeners. And not to mention they react to the equipment that the series has, right? And we know that these equipment are basically guitar amps and whatnot. They're stuff that actually outputs sound. So as something that outputs sound and is affected by this sound, how can you be earless? You need to be able to receive these sounds in a certain way, right? So being called listeners definitely makes a lot more sense than calling them as earless. We also learn a bit more about the truth about the situation in regards to Jimi Stonefree and Mew as well, I guess you could say. So even though it's been hinting since the past few episodes that Jimi was actually originally an earless and that Mew was her sister, it turns out that's not actually the case, right? So it seems that Jimi is actually a normal human. He was born here in this country called the Blues. His sister was Janice, and apparently after the sorry, I should call them listeners. After the listeners arrived, all hell broke loose, right? And then Jimi decided to venture out on his own and try and figure out what the heck was going on, and so he left his hometown. Later on, he managed to, through I guess also some help from the gnomes and whatnot. Anyways, he eventually became a player, and then he eventually came to a certain understanding with the listeners, right? Culminating in the event a few years ago. What? How many years ago? 10 years ago, I believe. Where they held this big festival, and Jimi was fully expecting to actually reach an understanding with the listeners, whereas he was later betrayed, and so it turned into a sort of a conflict instead. And Mew is, rather than being Jimi's sister, seems to be sort of like the result of the fusion between Jimi and the listener queen or listener king, right? I don't know why they later called her a king, especially considering that even just one episode previous they called her the earless queen. But in any case, I think that Mew is actually a fusion of these two, and so that's how we got here, right? And so I think the interesting thing to think about here is what exactly is Mew, truthfully, right? So definitely compared to Jimi, she is much more related with the listeners. You could say that she is at least half listener in a sense. And we can even argue whether or not the current personality she's showing is her true personality, right? I guess it depends on which half is actually in control, the more human-inspired half or the more listener-inspired half here. So I think that is definitely something that we will need to resolve by the end of this anime, and it's probably going to have something to do with the whole reason that listeners came into this world in the first place, right? Like what caused them to come here? That's still a mystery, right? And I believe depending on the answer, that might change some things. It might change how the series ends up. Now, my personal guess right now is that the listeners are sort of like a response to trying to bring music into the human world. Once again, I'm going back to the synopsis of this anime. I think in the very initial synopsis, it was saying that this is a world without music. Even though there's clearly all these different instruments and there's clearly still sound waves and whatnot. So perhaps they were the manifestation as a result of trying to bring music into this world. Doesn't really make much sense, but then again, nothing in this anime really does. It's just my best guess as of right now. Speaking of things not making much sense, we got a lot of dialogue and a lot of internal soul searching, pseudo philosophical stuff in the middle there, in particular between Echo and old man Robert and Janice and whatnot. I said in the episode that it kind of sort of reminds me of Evangelion in a sort of way, right? Like you're trying to get down to the root of it, like what is my purpose in this world, what is my purpose in life, what is the relationship between people and between person and person, and all that yada yada sort of stuff, right? But definitely this one makes less sense than what Evangelion tried to do here. Um, in fact, after all this, I still don't think I have a complete understanding on what the hell they were actually talking about. But I guess the thing that we need to take away from this is, anyways, Echo is back on his feet and he wants to do something about Mew's situation, and that's basically it. I think that's basically what we can get out of all this here. So I guess that's the important thing. He probably, speaking of him and Janice and Robert and all that, he probably did not stay there for as long a time as we were thinking of. Um, I would say it's probably more, even though within the anime it seemed that he stayed there for like months, right? He stayed through a harvest and whatnot. Seasons have changed already, but because those were just illusions of some sort, right? We see later on that it was actually already a rundown town. It was simply some manifestation of the records or memories or whatever you want to call it, and so in a sense it was all in Echo's mind, right? I guess sort of similar back to episode 2 or 3, while he was fighting against the three sisters and getting into a situation where it seemed that this is happening, but in reality he was just trapped within his own mind. I think it's something similar to that. So in reality, time probably did not pass. Um, there wasn't as much time that passed that was portrayed as well. So especially, that would make a lot of sense, right? Mew and whatever Tommy was trying to do, that definitely didn't take like a few months, right? It was almost completed at that point. So I would mostly say that probably at most a few days or something like that. Um, and so yeah, that's the entire situation with Echo. Now, for moving on to the references in this episode, because once again, as with all the other episodes, this one is chock full of references as well, particularly the title, right? The title is called Crossroad Blues, and we also see a hint of who the artist actually is. It is Robert Johnson, who, it was mentioned a little bit at the beginning there on the cover of the record. Now, I don't know who Robert Johnson is, so I had to look this up. Apparently, he is a very early, like 30s, 40s, 20s, 30s blues guitarist slash singer-songwriter. I have really never heard of him at all, and apparently that's to be expected. He wasn't all that famous, but apparently he was one of the pioneers of the blues style in the U.S. in regards to that particular genre of music. So he is actually quite a big deal in the certain circles, I say. And Crossroad Blues is his one of his songs, but it was later made much more famous with the Eric Clapton rearrangement and a version of it, which was then renamed as Crossroads. So I mentioned that when we're talking about blues and old rock and roll and whatnot in the U.S., you have these, like I said, B.B. King, Eric Clapton, these names, right? So it makes sense here. And we also see that once again, it's doing a direct reference just directly from the song title, right? Crossroads. We literally say crossroads here, a crossroads of how Echo should go forward, right? Should he just live his life peacefully and just withdraw from everything, or should he choose to go back to Mew and try to knock some sense into her? Even though technically, I think the current Mew is the true Mew, right? But anyways. And then, of course, blues. This was obviously a blues song, and then this town is called Blues Town or Blues Country or whatever you want to call it. So it has these kinds of references in there, right? And while I was doing my research, some other stuff came up that was also pretty interesting. Apparently, there is, in regards to Robert Johnson, there is this sort of urban legend surrounding him that he sold his soul to the devil in order to gain his musical talents and abilities, right? So it kind of sort of also ties in with this episode as well. Echo made a direct reference about not wanting to be either God or the devil or whatnot. He just wanted to find Mew. We can see near the end of this episode, he was in a place that seems similar to a church, right? Well, honestly, it was probably a church, right? But I'm just saying that all this stuff is adding together, building on the story of Robert Johnson and building on the story of Crossroad Blues. Oh, by the way, I was saying about Robert. There's this urban legend surrounding Robert Johnson in regards to selling his soul to the devil, and one of the myths is also that the song Crossroad Blues is actually talking about him actually on the crossroads to selling his soul to the devil. At least that's how the urban legend goes anyways. Apparently it's not true and it's just fabricated and whatnot. That wasn't the meaning of the song at all. But then again, who really knows, right? Because he was long dead before he became famous, and so there is relatively little information in regards to all of this. But anyways, I just once again appreciate the writers for trying to incorporate the like sort of musical legends, if you will, into the episode title, into the story as well, and then make all these references, even though as a whole the story isn't really coherent. And also, I think one final thing is the ending song for this episode, right? Slumber, which is the sort of melody that Mew was humming all along on her journeys, and apparently all the little kids from the Londonian Patrol also know how to hum for some reason or another. So I guess basically what it's saying is this is probably a song from Jimmy's hometown, from this town of blues and whatnot, and so that is how it got how it got spread throughout, right? Now, personally, even though I really enjoy the fact that they finally made a reference back to the humming in this, and indeed it's quite fitting as well, having this sort of very country, very blues-esque kind of song really gives you nostalgia. You know, you hear this song and you instantly think hometown, small town, home village, that kind of stuff. Probably referring to Jimmy and how he started out in this small little town, small little village, and then going back to her roots, if you will. Now, the thing here, though, is I think in order for this to have more impact, you should actually incorporate it within the episode and not just as an ending song, right? Indeed, in terms of a song that is utilized to great effect, you know, this sort of nostalgia for your hometown, for simpler times, that kind of stuff. The example that instantly pops into my mind is the song Bob Lennon from 20th Century Boys, which is a very famous manga. It was never adapted into an anime, but it was adapted into a live action film, which utilized the song to great effect as well. And you know, just when the melody comes out, and then you're thinking about the circumstances of the story and whatnot, and how you just want to. It's hard to describe, but basically, the feelings that it invokes is definitely much more suited for. I mean, if they wanted to do it as an ending, they could do it that way, but I don't know. I just feel like the implementation, the execution wasn't all that there. They could have made it into a much more impactful closer here. Using it as an ending, fine, you can do that, but I feel like you should need some, because of the way that they stylize the ending, right? They don't actually show anything new. They only show what happened within this episode and in a restylized animation, in a restylized drawing, right? So I feel like the impact of the song wasn't fully there. So that's something that's unfortunately missed out, and well, there's a lot of misfortune in terms of the execution in this anime. But just one more thing to add to the list, I feel like would have really elevated the anime a bit more. So anyways, that's enough talk. That was episode 10 of Listeners. 2 more episodes until the very end here, and well, I can even guess that next episode we're probably going to be trying to convince Mew to come back to the good side, or at least try to reach a compromise and everything, and then the big finale in episode 12. So stay tuned, guys, and I will see you guys next week as well. Bye bye.